Hi, this is Brad. I'm going to be showing you how to plan a flight from San Jose, California to Ontario, California. That would be KSJC to KONT. And I'll be flying the A320neo by JAR. And I'll be showing you first of all how to program the 320 FMC or FMS, whatever you want to call it. And then later on we'll be taking a little bit of a flight. Our initial takeoff is going to be from probably 30 right out of KSJC. And I've gone to FlightAware to do my planning, or at least get my route, because these are real routes that are flown by actual airlines or anybody with an instrument flight plan. So this is the one I dialed in. This happens to be a Southwest flight, but it's a pretty straightforward flight. I doubt I'm going to have to put any extra waypoints in, and I don't see any jet airways. So again, pretty straightforward. The FMS will probably handle the whole thing for me automatically. Here's the SID chart out of San Jose, and I like this because it's slightly interesting. It's a little bit of a challenge. When using this particular SID, you have to be careful to note some instructions down here at the bottom, mainly this paragraph here that has you climb out on the runway heading until you're 1.8 miles from the VOR, and then you make a right heading to 110 degrees to intercept a radial out of Oakland and then on to the Mooney intersection. And the A320 FMS does do a nice job of laying this out for you and basically automating it. But the thing it doesn't do is help you fly out on a heading and then make that turn. So that's something you do manually, and then when you're ready you engage the lateral navigation. Okay, back to our map at skyvector.com. Notice I've laid out the waypoints here. So after we take off, we'll intercept or cross Mooney and then head on down to Avenal VOR, which is our transition point out of San Jose. And then our transition point going into Ontario is going to be Palmdale VOR. Then you'll see a series of waypoints in our star that will take us on in and land us to the west into Ontario. I've pulled up the Ziggy Star arrival chart, and you can see our Palmdale transition. We are not going to be using any of these or Gorman, but we'll be coming at a different angle. But anyway, this is our transition point, and then you can see the waypoints that take us on into Ontario. So enough of charts and maps. Let's head on over to our aircraft. Whoops, before we head over to the airplane, a quick word about fuel. At fuelplanner.com you can put in your aircraft type and your origin and destination and get a general idea of what your fuel needs are going to be, at least for flight sim purposes. And I'm interested in this number here, and that's the number I want to check before I get too far in my startup process. I want to make sure we've got fuel. You can also see that there's a block time and reserve here as well. You must be careful to note that these are in pounds and the A320 is working in kilograms. So using the Google conversion program, you can convert pounds to kilograms before you head over to the aircraft, which we'll do now. Alright, here we are in the aircraft. I've got my FMC front and center. But down in the lower left I've got my fueling panel. And according to my fuel planner, I want to be at 5.8 kilograms times 1,000. So I will ramp that up, round it off at 6, and make sure that we've got enough fuel, which we have plenty of at this point. So we'll pull the truck away from the airplane and head over to our FMC. Normally I do all of my programming using the iPad app from Air FMC, which is really nice because it just really speeds up the process, but I'll just do it conventionally for the purposes of those of you who don't have that particular app. So let's put in our origin and destination and then align our IRS. And for today will be United Airlines. This is really an optional entry you have to make unless you're using something like Pilot Edge and talking to live ATC. I'm going to use my typical cost index of 20. It seems to work well for almost any flight. But notice I'm not going to put in a cruise altitude, because if I do it now I'm going to get a cruise error. You have to wait until after you get your flight plan in and put in your performance specs. Just check our fuel again. So I just use the default. Now head over to our flight plan. We're going to be departing from runway 30 right, and we'll be using the SID San Jose 9. For transition, we're going to use Avenal. Now we'll insert that into the FMC. And then we'll head over and put in our star. Now I've done this before. I've made this flight before, I should say, and I know that the FMC, by just entering the SID and star, will fill in all the waypoints between those two airports. But if we were to need additional waypoints put in manually, we would do that before we enter the star. Otherwise you're going to get some bizarre results, at least on the A320. So you would put in additional waypoints and airways before the star. But that's not the case today. So we're going to be landing on 26 right. We'll be using the Ziggy 4 star. And our transition will be Palmdale. So we'll go ahead and insert that. Now let's just finish up our programming here. We'll put in our V1 speeds by just clicking the default. Our flex number is already here, but we do need to put in our flaps. Notice the trim wheels spinning. And that's it before we take off, other than putting in our cruise altitude of 30,000. So now that our FMC is programmed, I just want to step through our route to make sure it makes sense on the navigational display. We check our flight route on our navigational display by setting this to plan, and we can just leave it at 20. That should be fine. And then we'll zoom in a little bit here, and I'm going to use my iPad app to step through these. So you can see that this shows a pretty quick turn after takeoff, but we're actually going to be extending our takeoff heading for 1.8 miles past the VOR. Mooney is our first published waypoint, and that is our top of climb. And then this should be our Avenal transition, and then we begin our descent at top of descent, and that comes before Palmdale, which is our transition to our star. And finally, the little circle, magenta circle with the lines in it, will be our 10,000 foot mark, where we put on the landing lights and begin to get serious about our approach. And on into Ontario. So, other than taxiing out to the runway, we're ready to go. Here we are, ready to taxi. Engines are started. We just have to do a few things before we begin our taxi to the end of the runway. We'll start by setting our spoilers.
Spoilers arm.
And then our flaps.
Flaps 1. Flaps 2.
Put our engine switch to normal. Turn off our APU. We don't really need any lights other than the beacon, which should be on before you start up. I suppose we could turn on our nav lights, but we'll wait to put on our strobe and landing lights until we are at the end of the runway. Put in our initial altitude after takeoff of 5,000 feet. Put our auto brake at max, and now we're ready to taxi.
When the seatbelt sign illuminates, you must fasten your seatbelt. Insert the metal fittings.
I won't bore you with a long trip to the end of the runway, but I'll cut it at this point, and you can join us at the end. Well, here we are at the end of runway 30 right at San Jose. A few things to do before we take off. We're going to, first of all, turn off our packs, at least for takeoff. We'll flip them back on after we get into the air. Strobes on, landing lights on. Make sure that our rose is on arc, and I'm going to set this to 10 miles for greater accuracy. I normally would set the heading here, but this version of the A320 does not have that feature. Jar says he's going to put it back in, but I don't think he's in a hurry at this point. I noticed that my VOR is not reading 114.1, which is the San Jose VOR, which we need for our takeoff, because our SID indicates that we need to be 1.8 miles before we begin our right turn. So get that plugged in here. And right now we're at 1.88 miles on the other side of that. So we are ready to go at this point. Alright, we've been cleared for takeoff. Park brake off. Little power. This will be a rolling start, meaning we will not stop. We'll just proceed with our takeoff. Power up. Power is set. Start our clock. Cross check at 80.
100 knots. Speed 1. Rotate. Positive climb. Gear up. Spoilers disarm. Autopilot 1, cross check.
And we're going to fly this heading
Speed check. Flaps 1.
till we're 1.8 miles from the San Jose VOR. Turn our packs back on.
Standard baro cross check. Passing flight level 0.
We're watching our distance here, getting ready to begin our lateral navigation.
Speed check. Flaps 0.
We're at 1.8. We'll begin our turn. Climbing to 5,000 feet at 250 knots. Beautiful day in San Jose. So our aircraft is all cleaned up. We're beginning our turn to our plotted route. Unfortunately, the route does not show that 1.8 mile extension of our takeoff. We're now at 5,000 feet and we're just waiting for ATC to give us clearance to our cruise altitude. And we can set our standard baro. Supposed to wait till 18,000, but it is flashing, so I don't know if that's a bug in the A320 or not. So let's dial in our cruise altitude of flight level 300. The airport below. I've actually made this trip commercially many times and seen that view. Back in the cockpit, and we've been cleared for our cruise altitude. So the engines spool up and we begin our climb. First to 10,000 feet, where we will level off, build up a little more speed, turn off our landing lights, and begin our climb, final climb to our cruising altitude. So we'll check back in at 10,000 feet. So we're coming up on 10,000 feet, our first checkpoint, which is Mooney. So nose down, build up a little speed. You don't have to climb at the speed it sets itself at, but I just leave it there because it matches up a little bit better with our top of climb indicator. And we can turn off our lights at this point. We'll keep everybody seated. And we're at 320 knots, and the nose comes up, and we begin our final climb. You can see Monterey Bay in the distance, Santa Cruz, and the South Bay area behind us. Coming up on our first checkpoint, Mooney. We'll make a slight adjustment in our heading. Six minutes after takeoff. And because we're in a managed climb, we do not see open climb here, just straight climb. And here we are, Mooney. And now we're climbing to our top of descent, which is 85 nautical miles. So we have reached our top of climb. We are now at 30,000 feet. Our throttles are set for cruise. We have our speed bug set at just below 300 knots. And we've turned off the seatbelt sign.
We are close to top of descent, sir.
So here we begin our turn over Avenal. We've been warned about top of descent, which is still another 83 miles away, but it's just the way JAR has this programmed. So we'll check back in at top of descent. We are coming up on our top of descent, so I want to set my altitude to our final approach fix altitude, which is 2,800. So I've got 3 miles to go. And let's begin our descent. So the nose comes down, throttles go to idle. Notice our speed bug has dropped to 280. Put on the seatbelt sign. And our next checkpoint is going to be Palmdale, which is our transition. Take a look out the window here. So we're going to be coming around the east side of the airport. The San Bernardino Mountains. And then go over the mountains at around Lake Arrowhead. And then on into Ontario. See Palmdale Airport. So we're at flight level 260 and descending. Let's check our ILS frequency, which is 111.35 for 26 left. So I just want to make sure that that has been properly set by the FMC. So I'll check back in just a few minutes when we get a little bit closer to the 10,000 mark. So we are coming up on Maycheck, our first waypoint after our transition. We are supposed to be at 10,300 by Maycheck. We're a little bit high. I do have spoilers half. It's not critical. But we want to be at 10,000 feet at the red circle there.
Spoilers retracted.
So we can turn on our landing lights now. Seat belts are still on. And we'll click our ILS. Lake Arrowhead off in the distance. Our speed now is 250 because we are below 10,000 feet. Ontario is off here in the distance. Lake Silverado. This is the San Bernardino Mountains here. Big Bear is up here. A ski resort. Beginning our turn here. Change the range on our EFIS. Boy, I'm having issues here. Just setting the barrel. How am I ever going to land? And our temperature, 15 Celsius. And we're just going to put in 0 wind for today. And get our approach phase ready to go. And I'll do that at Ziggy. I find that's better to do it a few miles before. We're still at 250. So let's begin our approach phase.
Approach phase activated.
And I see our guide slope and localizer diamonds, so I'm gonna, oh, I've got the ILS on. So I'll wait until we get a little bit closer and then click our approach to intercept the localizer. Need a little more drag.
Spoilers half.
And once we get to the green dot, we'll add some flaps.
Speed checked. Flaps 1. Spoilers retracted.
And we're turning towards Ontario. Another notch of flaps.
Speed checked. Flaps 2.
We've intercepted the localizer, and our guide slope is, well, it says we're on.
Speed checked. Flaps 3.
And we'll put our auto brake on medium. No gear yet. San Gabriel Mountains off the nose.
Speed checked. Flaps full.
We're about 8 miles out. We can put the gear down.
Gear down. Radio altimeter alive.
So we're at 140. Green lights. Outer marker. And we're lined up nicely for 26 left. And we can set our spoilers.
Spoilers armed.
So far we've been 52 minutes into our flight. I tried to get airport scenery for Ontario, but it's not compatible with 10.30 X-plane. So
500. 400.
Land green checked.
300.
middle marker.
100 above.
So we want to watch for the
100.
flare.
Minimum 40, 30, 20. Retard, retard,
Throttles
retard,
down.
retard, retard.
First green. knots.
And there's our flight. Nothing much to taxi to, so I think we'll just leave it at that. But thanks for being on board, and I hope it was educational.